This is the last week where we're going to be drilling JavaScript fundamentals, and the rest of the weeks that we spend on JavaScript are going to be much more focused on hammering down what we've already learned. So we're going to be reviewing, we're going to be applying what we've learned, we're going to be expanding on what we've learned, but you're going to learn fewer and fewer just dramatically new things every single week once we lay down that foundation. This week you are going to be building your first full web app. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's going to require a lot of very classic JavaScript logic. So you guys are going to struggle with it, which is fine. This is the point. This is the Apple homepage of JavaScript, basically. You're going to struggle with it. You're going to realize a lot of the problems that you're going to run into all the time with JavaScript, and you're going to get yourself better at facing those problems and overcoming them. But the key to learning anything in JavaScript and learning it well really is just repetition. It's important to me that you understand what you're writing and understand what you're doing. But at the very, very least, if you code along with me, either in the videos or here in class, or you recode your projects, if you code this Zodiac app 3 times, you will be able to do it in your sleep. Okay? And that's the goal. You're going to struggle with it this week, you're going to struggle with it next week, but by week 9, week 10, you should be able to do it with your eyes closed. And you're going to get there. So bear with me for just a little bit longer. This week is a lot lighter on material than last, but we are starting to get into the deep end. Especially next week when we're going to start talking about more about the document object model and how the JavaScript browser actually reads the code that you write. Okay, but for now, let's start with the quiz up on the screen. One more minute. Yeah. If you add the quotation, it also is not over?
Yeah, if I add a quotation to hello, well, I mean, if I were to run it together, but I'll do it individually, then I'll see.
If you run it together with the quotation, you shouldn't get that number.
If I was to add, I guess what it is that if I were to add that and sign, well, I'm sorry, that percent sign, that's what I would do it. Are you asking me if I were to do it individually?
No, the whole statement, if you plug the whole statement in with that quotation mark, you shouldn't evaluate the non-number.
We do it.
Yeah, do it.
Alright. Turn my brightness up.
Otherwise, you're good. What for number 6?
What do you, or you just want like, besides
It's-
what it is, like,
It's
besides, is that what you want me to do?
not a primitive data type.
It's not a primitive one?
It's not a primitive. It is a data
That
type.
is dead, right? So an array is a primitive one, right?
An array is not a primitive one either.
Only booleans, numbers, and strings.
And null and undefined. Alright, folks. A for effort. So for number 1, what is this statement going to evaluate to if we plug it into our console?
Could be in the syntax error.
It's going to give you a syntax error. Good. Why is it going to give you a syntax error? Anyone know where the error is?
The first parenthesis, quotation.
Yeah, we're missing that first quotation sign in front of hello, right? If you did add that quotation mark, what would it evaluate to?
100%.
That's not how that percent sign works. But I think you know what you're talking about.
Keep getting the syntax error.
Really?
Yeah.
Might be the second quotation marks. Second pair.
Yeah, see, that's you can't copy and paste it, unfortunately. You have to rewrite it because it's copying over quotation marks that aren't read correctly in the browser.
That makes sense.
So, well, let's evaluate each side of the statement individually. Assuming that we have that quotation mark in front of hello, what is the length of the string hello?
4, 5.
5.
5. Why do you say 4 when?
Start with 0.
You do for indexes. We're taking the index of each character. But when counting the length, you count starting from 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many characters does it contain? 5. And what about world? What is the length of world?
5.
Also 5. So what is 5 mod 5?
0.
0. 5 mod 5 is 0. 5 is evenly divisible by 5, so it returns 0. What about number 2? What will this evaluate to in the console?
3.
Why?
Because you're asking, well, it is the length of that string.
It's what?
Well,
That's the right answer, but
for object, you're
not an object. Those are 2 arrays.
the arrays, you're going into it and you're just asking the length of string.
Yeah. Okay, so we're asking the length of these 2 arrays, and what determines the length of an array?
How many data types are there?
How many things are inside of it? How many things are inside of it? So how many things are in the array that contains 1, 2, 3? And how many things are in the array that contains string? 1. 1. The length of that array is 1. It only has 1 item, but it's still an array. Okay, so those square brackets, you got to look out for them. Number 3, what does document.getElementById parentheses mean, and what does it take as an argument?
It's like that on-click example. When you go in HTML, when you go ahead and give it an ID,
Mm-hmm.
you would go ahead and call that back.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. Document.getElementById is a function. Specifically, it's called a method, but we're going to talk about that next week. It's a function which returns an element with a specific ID. What does it take as an argument? What goes inside those parentheses?
H1.
Not H1.
An ID.
An ID. An ID. And what is the data type of the argument that this function takes? String. Good. I want you to be aware of that. It's really easy to kind of just like mentally gloss over the fact that you are inserting a string as an argument into that function. I know I did. Okay, document.getElementById is a function which selects and returns to you an element from your HTML document, which has the ID that you tell it to look for.
Do we need to include the octacore?
The what?
The hashtag.
Is it really called an octathorpe? Wow, I'm going to use that now. No, you do not need to use the hashtag, and that is an excellent question. If you tell your computer to look for an element with, if you use document.getElementById and you do something like this, it's going to be looking for an element which has the attribute of ID equals hashtag intro, which is not correct, right? Think of what you would write in your HTML. You write ID equals intro. You use the hashtag as a CSS selector, but we don't want to use it to try to match the string we plug in to getElementById with the string contained in your ID attribute. Okay, they need to be the exact same thing. And what data type is returned to us by document.getElementById?
String.
Not a string. Let me copy this line of code, create a div with an ID of intro, fix this. And let's open this in browser and see. So our div is invisible, but it's there. There's our div. Now I'm going to call document.getElementById intro in the console. What's going to return to me?
Div.
The div itself, that's true, but what data type is that? it is an element, but that's not a data type. So what's happening here is this line of code is returning a certain data type, and the console is doing us the favor of converting it into recognizable and readable HTML. But this is not what is actually spit back to us. So what do you think is the underlying data type, which you have definitely learned about already, for an HTML element? It's not a string. It's not a number. It's not a Boolean. It's not null. It's not undefined. What are the two new ones that we learned this week?
Arrays and objects.
Arrays and objects. Is it an array?
It's an object.
It's an object. It's an object.
Why?
Why is the sky blue? I don't know. Because if you break it down, this is more conversation for next week, but why is, god damn you, why is because this object is actually represented, and don't get too sucked down this rabbit hole right now, by an object which has a certain number of properties, and those properties are things like
Name, stuff,
tag name, which is div,
Class ID.
so it does have ID, which is intro, but it's got a property called class list, which right now is just an empty array, and it also has a property called class name. This is stuff we'll get into next week, which is an empty string. It's got a whole lot of properties, but this is the underlying data type that represents the div that we just returned to us. Every HTML element, as far as JavaScript is concerned, is an object. Okay? We'll get more into that next week. But I want you to remember that that is the most important question in JavaScript. What data type is returning to me? What data type is returning to me? So I don't want you to see a line of code like this, see that it spits back an element, and just accept that as gospel. Because there's more going on there, and I want you to constantly try to ask that question of yourself. Try to dig a little bit deeper. That'll get you where you need to go. Right now, most important thing, most important takeaway, elements are objects. All right. Number 4. What does a for loop do? Allows us to run a block of code multiple times. Good. So, is there anything wrong with this for loop?
There's nothing within the,
Well, yeah, there's no code in there. Pretend there's code inside the for loop. Is there anything wrong with this for loop?
My string isn't a number.
Is it?
Oh, they're missing another, oh, no.
Oh, wait, never mind.
don't you need dot length in there? No.
Look a little closer.
The variable is already defined.
I put one. Oh, is that, here's my string in there. There's no length to, or something?
Well, look a little closer, Odie. You're right. There's no length inside the for. Okay, the answer is there's nothing wrong with this for loop.
Trick question.
But the reason why there's nothing wrong, but it looks like there's something wrong, is because there's no dot length here. You're right. But we included it up here.
Oh.
What do we need this to be? What data type do we need this to be? Nate.
A number.
We need it to be a number. I can't be less than Evan. Can't be less than a string. Everything's less than Evan. But I can't be less than a string. It can't be less than an array, less than an object. We need it to be a number. So then we need to check, well, what is my string? Here's the variable. What's the data type of this?
Number 2?
Number. So is there anything wrong?
No.
No. Still works. Still
But
works.
if you did not declare that dot length up there, then that would.
Then it would be a string,
Then
yes.
it would be-
Why do we use variables? Makes our life easy. That is true. That is true. How do they make our lives easier? They can store data. And how does that make our lives easier?
You can call them back from, whatever you need to put it up there.
Yeah, you can reference it whenever or wherever you want. So even if it's a long line of code, you can call it with a simple variable name at any point in time. What is an object? What's that?
It's a variable with multiple data sets.
Not a variable. A variable can contain an object, but a variable is just an empty unit of storage. So, try again. What's an object?
It's a complex way of storing data.
Complex way of storing data. Okay.
With properties.
With properties in the form of properties. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll take that. An object is a complex data type. So it's not a primitive data type, but it is one of the fundamental data types of JavaScript. So we've now learned about strings. We've learned about numbers. We've learned about booleans. We've learned null and undefined, which are just nothing. And now we've learned arrays and objects. Okay? Primitive, not primitive, but they're all data types. They're all data types. So an object is a complex means of storing data in the form of properties. What kind of data can an object contain?
Contain strings, numbers, and booleans.
Is that all?
And arrays, maybe? No.
The answer is anything. You can store arrays in objects. You can store objects in objects. You can store null in objects if you really want. Objects can contain any data type under the sun. What about arrays? Is there a limit to what we can put in an array?
Yes.
What's the limit? What can we not put in an array? In an array. I can say that. Nothing. There is no limit to what can go in an array. Arrays, like objects, can store anything, any data type. We can, for example, have an array of arrays. How many items does this array have?
2.
It has 2 items. Okay? So if I call this array my ARR, and then I call my ARR.length, what am I going to get? Good. If I call my ARR 0index.length, what am I going to get?
1, 2, 3. Inside the array.
So what's the length of the first
Oh,
item in the array?
Or would it be 3?
It'd be 3. This array has a length of 3. This array has a length of 3. This array has a length of 2. Okay. You can store anything in an arrays, but we're still on objects. So objects are different and distinct from arrays in that arrays behave more like lists. The contents that they contain have a specific order. They're all numbered by index. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Objects are not lists. They are not lists. They do not use indexes. They have no indexes. Okay, so that's rule number 1. No square bracket 0, no square bracket I, no indexes when you're dealing with objects. Okay, indexes are for arrays or strings.
So like that, the zero index, which one would it be? It would be for that array.
It would be 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, right?
And the length of that is going to be 1, 2, 3, 3. So objects are simply larger collections of data which categorizes the properties of this collection of data. So if we had an Evan object, it would have a name property. It would have an age property. I'm not writing that. It would have a residences, cities of residence or whatever. And this would be something like that. Okay, we have our Evan object. So can you tell me, let's change this to a person object, var person. How can we access the name of this person? There's no indexes with objects. I heard that.
It'd be dot name.
Dot name. What dot name?
Person dot name.
Person dot name. Person dot name is going to access the name property of the person object. The name property of the person object. This is dot notation. We're going to be using a lot of it. Okay? So to access the name, you write person.name. Person is the object, name is the property, person.name. And what is that going to return to you? Evan, which is what data type? Good. How do I access the age property?
Person.age.
Person.age, and what is that going to return to you? And what data type is that? It's a number. How do I access the residences?
Person.residence.
Person.residences. And what is that going to return to you? An array. So far, so good? How do I access Shenzhen?
That's an index.
But where do I put it?
Residences.
So tell me what to write.
Person.residences, bracket, square bracket.
Yep.
1, 2, 2, 2.
0, 1, 2. Yep. And what data type is that going to return to us?
Stress.
String. Name of the city is a string. Okay? String, number, array, string. So far, so good?
Sorry to cut you off, but if I, just after those brackets right there, if I put dot length,
What's that going to give us?
would it give me the entire length of
No, it's going to give you the length of,
that right?
so it's going to give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Gotcha, yep.
So if I change this number to 3 and added dot length, what are we going to get?
The same.
No, we're on a different city now.
Oh, that's right.
Two.
01
2.
DC.
Okay? And what if I get rid of this number entirely and we just have person.residences dot length?
Each property? I mean, each.
What is dot length? What data type does dot length always return to you? Number.
Be six.
Whenever you see dot length, you expect a number. Yes, it would be 6.
list. When'd you live in Haiti?
Long time ago. I have a lot of family in the Caribbean. All right, that's an object. Any questions before we keep going? All right then. All right then. So by now, hopefully you guys have picked a domain name. I know some of you haven't sent it to me. Some of you have definitely not. So I would get on it if you want something custom.
Did you get mine?
I did get yours, yes. I hope also that you're still following new companies on LinkedIn each week. I know it doesn't feel like a lot, but it will go a long way once you start actually applying for jobs. It's important. And starting this week, the focus on the companies that you start to follow should be more news aggregators, content aggregators, rather than companies that you admire. They should be sources of content that you like to consume and read related to developing. So TechCrunch, Smashing Magazine, Mashable, Hacker Noon, CSS Tricks. A lot of resources out there. Hopefully you're starting to discover them on your own, but I'll continue posting resources as well. So number 4, what is an array? How would you describe an array? A list of items. Good. What is the length of an array?
As long as any length of the value that you put in.
How would you define the length of an array?
It's a number.
But what does that number signify? What does it indicate? How many
Items.
items are in the array? Okay, the length of an array is how many items are in the array. It's a number signifying how many items are contained in the array. And how do we access the length of an array? What the hell is that?
Hello? Hello? 中国大使馆提醒您。
You got spammed.
I got that same phone call earlier.
Yeah? Something going around then.
I get a lot of cruise ship phone calls. I want a cruise ship trip.
Okay, number 6. How do we access the first item in an array?
To the index.
Right, and what is the index of the first item in an array?
0.
What's the index of the second item in an array? What's the index of the 5th item in an array?
4.
Good. What's the index of the 10th item?
5.
The 100th?
29.
The 3000th?
29.
Okay. You get the pattern here, right? Good. So,
It's just always one behind that.
it's all, yes, the index of the item you're trying to access is one behind the actual item it is, if you count. That didn't come out right. But let's try something. Yes, Nate?
So going back to last week when we talked about finding the last letter or last index of a word, you do the index minus 1, or is it the length minus 1, since we're trying to find that?
Good question, and that's exactly where we're going. So if I have my array, 1, 2, 3, 4, how do I access the last item in that array? And what's the index of the last item? 3. My array at the 3 index will give us 4. Let me do this in the console, actually. Okay, so my array at the index of 3 is going to return to me the last item in the array. What is the length of this array? It is 4. So, if we don't know how many items are contained in my array, or if my array is a dynamic array, dynamic piece of data, how can we always, guaranteed, access the last item in that array? What's going to be the index of the last item of the array? Without actual numbers.
My r.length minus 1.
Like this.
And that'll always be true for any limit
Anything.
of items in a list.
Unless it's empty, I guess.
Then you'll get null.
You'll probably get undefined, because it'll look for the negative first index, which usually indicates that something is not present in that array.
You could use that just to find the last item on the
To
list.
find the last item on an array.
Or find the last letter of a word.
Or the last
That will
character of a
always
string. Correct. It will always work. The array at the index of the length of the array minus 1. That's the pattern. That's why it's significant that the fifth item in the array is at the fourth index. The sixth item is at the fifth index, etc., etc. You will learn to appreciate these patterns more when you have to use them, but
It's just minus 1.
I guess,
length minus 1.
up here, this was in my head, I think I got a little too ahead, but, with the return and the breaks, loops, I guess that's something I probably got a little,
Return and break.
yeah,
Okay.
using them at the right, using them, I don't know if it's,
What do they do?
well, it's just, so you're just not, that loop is just, it's like, it's not continuously running, you just don't wanna take up, I guess, saves up space, or have to go
Yeah.
through the entire list.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So which one stops a loop? Break or return?
Return. No, that's very,
It's break. However, you've probably seen return, because if you are running a loop in a function, return actually breaks a function. So it'll break the whole thing. The whole thing. It'll break the context that that loop is in. Break is what's actually used to stop a loop. We'll talk about that when we get to the project, but that's a good question.
that was probably one of the things I was having a little difficulty with.
Fair enough. Okay, how do we log to the console 0 to 100 in increments of 5? Probably going to need 4. Probably going to need the word var. Probably going to need an I somewhere. Maybe an equal sign. There you go. What's next? Okay, what is our terminating condition if we want to log to the console?
Oh, I just really, more than equal to, less than
Let's do less than or equal to 100. And then what? Yep, I'm gonna write out the full expression this time, just for variety's sake. I equals I plus 1. And then what? Now, what do we want to do? Do we want to log every value of I between 0 and 100? No. What values of I do we want to add? Or console log, I mean.
So you want to use that mod.
Right. We only want to log I when it is an increment of 5. So we're going to need an if statement. If I mod 5 equals 0, console log, what are we logging?
I modulus.
No? Just I. There we go. Okay. Did you guys get the I know I posted it on like Wednesday, Thursday. Did you guys get the opportunity Thursday to try any of these exercises? Okay, that's all right. They're not going anywhere, but I strongly recommend it. They're really good practice, and the solutions for them, I posted the video where I walk through all of them right below. It's about 40 minutes long. You can skip through if you feel good about however many of these. The functions at the end in particular are going to be great practice for you guys that I really suggest you put some time into. Give them a shot on your own and then watch the videos. Watch the video.
That's in the class?
It's in the class channel. Yeah.
I'm not-
Is that one that we already watched for this week? Or that's separate?
No, it's exclusively me walking through these exercises up here.
Can I join that class one, or?
Are you should be in here.
No.
You're not in here. Yes, I'm gonna add you. Okay. But I also dropped it in the JavaScript channel. So if you can't find it there for whatever reason.
That's awesome.
The JavaScript exercises? Yeah, they're the same ones, but Daniel has also kind of dominated this channel for now. All right, let's move on. So take some time this week to work through those exercises. I think it'll be very good practice for you guys.
That was a pad tap JavaScript.
Yeah, he's remaking padded tab. In a for loop which uses a variable I as an iterator, how can we use I to log every item in an array to the console? So in other words, we have an array, we have a for loop that uses I as its iterator. What role does I play if we want to log every item in the array to the console? If we want to loop through every item in the array, where does I fit into that equation? Not necessarily. But that's not what I'm asking. What purpose is I serving in our for loop? If we want to log every item in the array to the console. What number?
So, what length is the array? How many individual strings are in it?
That's dot length, but how are we going to use I to loop through every item in the array? How do we use I to loop through every character in a string?
The brackets?
Mm-hmm.
Use array, brackets like that.
And what is I? What role is I playing in this line of code here?
Well, I was pretty much playing what you have with that array would be
But what is I in place of?
The index.
The index. Okay, we're replacing the index of the item we're accessing with I. So when I is 0, we're going to get the first item. When I is 1, we're going to get the second item. When I is 2, we're going to get the third, etc., etc. So just like looping through characters in a string, that will return to us items in an array. We're replacing I with the index. Make sense? Okay.
Could you put my R square bracket I in the condition, the middle part of the?
That's a good question. What's going to happen here?
Without the length?
Without the length. Well, what is my array at the I index? Is it a number?
So, the item?
Yes, and is the item a number? No. Okay, so that's part one. If we did leave I in there like that, my array at the I index dot length, what is that going to be?
0. Just be A.
There is dot length there. It's going to be 1.
You don't need
So-
a second I in the console log. Yeah, but after.
Well, we whatever we have inside the console log is fine. But what's going to happen here is JavaScript's going to hit this for loop, and it's going to see, okay, I equals 0. Let's look at the terminating condition. As long as I is less than my array at the 0 index dot length, what's that?
0.
What's the length
No, it'd be 1.
of A? It's 1. So as long as I is less than 1, run this for loop, we're going to see A, then it stops. It's only going to run one time. You're never going to see that though. If you see square brackets, square bracket I in your terminating condition, you've got some wires crossed. Don't do it. Okay. When using a for loop to loop through an array, what is our terminating condition usually? How do we define the terminating condition when we're looping through an array?
Break or return.
No, that's a separate thing.
If it returns false.
That's how terminating conditions work. Yes, that's true. But when we're specifically dealing with an array and we want to loop through all the items in an array, what is most likely going to be our terminating condition?
The last item.
Not the last item. I is less than what? The length of the array. Okay, so when we're dealing with an array, you're usually going to see the length of the array as the terminating condition. Number 10, in document.getElementById, what is the document?
The HTML.
Yes, it's the HTML document. Excellent. What's the data type of the document?
Object.
It's an object. It's an object. So, how did we access the name property of that person object again?
Person.name.
Person.name. Document.getElementById. See a pattern here? Dot notation. Okay, the document is an object. GetElementById is really just a property of that object. Okay?
Could you choose get element by name?
There's two other methods that you're going to learn over the course of this week. Get elements by class name and get elements by tag name. Both of which are completely valid ways of selecting elements from JavaScript. But students invariably trip over themselves because they fail to remember that get elements by class name and get elements by tag name don't return a single object. They return an array of objects. So when stringing logic onto this, like if they want to grab an element by the ID and then change the color of it, you can do that with get element by ID. But you need something extra for get elements by class name because you can't change the color of an array. You have to change the color of an item in the array. So that usually trips a lot of students up. We'll talk about it more next week. For now, get element by ID is your friend. How would you store 3 sets of data with all the same properties but different values? For example, 3 cars, each with a make, model, and color property but different values for each property.
Make a variable cars, name of cars, and
Okay.
Create the array
Okay.
of each property and value.
The array with each property and value?
The object.
Yes. Okay, so each car should be an object with 3
As an
properties.
Object, that'd be object. So like say I put for one as the object I put what is that called?
We're dealing with cars here, but it can be anything you want.
Right. But then if you say like say you choose that, so you have like three different cars.
Yes.
And then you want to go ahead and give them a color, give them a year or a different model type.
Yeah.
Would that'd be another object within that property?
No.
That's valid.
So here's one car. I don't even know if Honda is a model or a make. I don't know the difference. I'm talking to the wrong person. It's a make. I'm changing them to make. That makes sense. No pun intended. All right, so we have 3 cars here. and each of them, let me change them. Mazda, they're all red cars, but 3 different makes, 3 different objects, 3 different sets of data, each representing a car. So if I wanted to, I could store each of these in their own variable, like var Honda or var car 1 and car 2. You know what I mean? Each of these could be in their own variable, just like that, and each variable would contain one object representing a whole car,
Right.
an object with 3 properties. Or, what I could do
One variable.
is create a variable cars, which is actually an array containing 3 objects.
Okay, I guess that's a non-direct question, that's why, that's something I was asking right there.
Yeah. So it's an array containing 3 objects, but each object has 3 properties. So let's use this as an example. Let's move forward with this. Cars is an array of 3 objects, right? I can expand it and look at it if I want, but that's where we are. What is cars.length?
3.
Yeah, 3. What is cars at the 1 index?
All of the first
Object.
It's an object, and I don't remember which car it is. It's a Mazda. What's going to return to us again?
Right.
everything on the first index.
Yeah, the whole object. The whole object returns to us. So how do I get the make of the cars at the first index? Exactly. Okay, so far so good? All right, if I try to run cars1.length, what do you think we're going to get?
First, first one of each object.
No, this is cars at the first index, which is an object, 1 car, dot length.
3.
Objects don't have a length. Objects are not lists. Objects don't have a length. Yeah, it is a trick question. Now, another trick question. Can I add properties to this object? Let me try adding. What is a model? What's an example of a model of a car? CRV. All right. CRV. Cars1.model equals CRV. Now, let me call cars. And we've got a new property. Okay, so far so good. So let me run document.getElementById again, which returns this div, right? This div is what kind of data type?
Object.
An object. Can we access properties of objects?
Yes.
Okay, let me store this in a variable, just to make things a little easier. So my div now contains that div. So if I say my div dot ID, what should return to us? Exactly, a string saying intro. If I run my div dot class name, what should return to us? Actually, it's going to be an empty string, but same difference for this case. Okay. What if I do this? My div dot class name equals each dark.
Now that empty string will have
Now let's take another look at our div. Now it has a class. So I've added a class using JavaScript. And how did I do that? Think about how I did that. I targeted the object, targeted the property inside that object, and assigned it a new value.
So what, you'd be using that to like override something? Or?
You could use it to override something. You could use it to trigger an animation, trigger a state change in your content. Or class name and ID are not nearly the only properties that an element object contains. I can do something like inner text. Now,
It's
Dot-
using the bootstrap.
not the same
as
thing.
class
Not the
name.
same. It's using Bootstrap because I have Bootstrap hooked up, and BG Dark is a Bootstrap class. But now let's add something like text white in there. Easier to read. Let's also add padding 5. Okay, now how did I insert that text? I accessed the inner text property of the div object, and I assigned it a value.
So when you give it,
Yes, you can do that with text content as well. Question?
when you give it a new class name, because what I see is like assigning only one value every time, but it's just gonna keep going.
So how do we add a new class name without rewriting all the classes you've already written? Is that what you're saying? Okay, so right now my div has a class name of BG Dark, Text White, Padding 5, right? Let's say I want to add my div dot, let me get rid of this. My div dot class name, I want to add text danger. I want to make the text red. What is this going to do? What's going to happen here?
Remove all the other classes.
That's not,
It's going to remove all of the other classes. So, how can we, rather than overwrite all the classes we've already written, add to the classes we've already written?
Plus equals.
Yeah, what's that a shorthand for? How do we add one to I without overwriting its original value?
I plus plus.
Yeah, but what is that a shorthand for?
I plus 1.
What's the full expression? I equals I plus 1. Something equals itself plus something new. So what if I did my div dot class name equals my div dot class name plus BG Dark and padding 5 and space? Then it works. Although, oop, I destroyed my text danger.
Capital N.
Oh, you're right. There it is. Thanks. But now I gotta add it in here. God damn it! Alright, let me start over. My div dot class name equals text danger. My div dot class name equals my div dot class name with a capital N plus BG Dark padding 5. There we go. Okay, something equals itself plus something new. I equals I plus 1. Total equals total plus 4. This is a very common pattern in JavaScript. And as Nate said, there is a shorthand for it. My div dot class name plus equals text uppercase. Okay, so plus equals is a shorthand for this same pattern. But look at what we're doing. We are accessing our element, which is just an object, accessing a property of that element, and assigning it a value or updating its value. This is how we can manipulate literally anything from JavaScript.
So what would make you come here to JavaScript instead of just going to your HTML?
That was actually earlier than I thought it was going to be. It's only been an hour and 4 minutes. That question gets asked every single
That's
time.
why this whole
With
thing's been blowing my mind. Why can't we just do it in HTML?
good question, excellent question actually. Why can't we just do this, or why don't we just do this in HTML?
You'll write a lot more code.
who wants to write all that?
It's actually, it can be a lot more code to do the same thing in JavaScript than it can be to do the same thing in HTML.
Yeah, but then, I mean, I guess, it's just like, because HTML and CSS just make it seem like it's just a plain picture.
Yeah.
Right?
It's just a static site. HTML and CSS, you can add hover effects, and that's pretty much it. You can add hover effects, maybe some cool CSS keyframe animations, but that's it. Think about what JavaScript allows you to do. It doesn't just allow you to...
So I guess I'm just stuck on we're just writing stuff right now.
Well, yeah, we are still just learning stuff, but I want you to think about what JavaScript allows you to do. JavaScript allows you to manipulate your site like this in any way you could possibly want under certain conditions, under certain circumstances. So if a user visits your site for the first time, they get this presentation. If they visit for the fourth time, they get a whole different screen. If they visit your site and they click this button, something like this happens, something different happens. Or if they come to your site, scroll all the way to the bottom, something entirely different happens. If they're using your application, and your application is in any way interactive, you need to keep track, your application needs to keep track of what the user has done, where they have visited, what choices they have made, and alter your page or app to reflect that.
So that data just gets stored and then it becomes...
Yeah, a lot of what JavaScript is going to end up doing for you guys is state management. And this is where, as developers, you're going to keep track of, okay, is the user logged in or not? And if is logged in is true, then blah, 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 blah. Or if they've activated this filter, then all of this stuff is going to show. And all of this stuff is not. If they want the dark theme of the website as opposed to the light theme, then we're going to switch out for a totally different style sheet. That's what JavaScript allows us to do. Think of it as a game. Yeah, think of it again, not just personalizing it, but actually creating a journey through your application or website. They can go here, they can go here, or they can go here. It's like a choose your own adventure made possible by JavaScript. JavaScript opens a whole lot of doors, and I know it can feel pretty esoteric right now, but I promise it'll get better. Okay, number 13, actually no, number 12. What's wrong with this code?
Capital D.
Capital D. Good. This is going to happen to every one of you if it hasn't already. It happens to me all the time. That's a lowercase d. That should be a lowercase d. If you type this into your console, document.get element by ID, intro, it tells me that getElementById is not a function. So there may be a time when you get that error and you want to throw your computer out the window because you know getElementById is a goddamn function. But the reality is you probably just have a typo. And in this case, it's that uppercase D. Yep. You want to make sure you're camel casing correctly. And you want to make sure that D is lowercase. 13. Can you store objects in an array? Can you store arrays in an array?
Yes.
Can you store arrays in object properties? Yes. Can you store objects in object properties? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. We're going to see a lot of that later on. Okay, number 14. If we have a student object with a name property and an age property, how can we access the student's name to log it to the console? Student.name. Student.name. Number 15. Why might we loop through an array? True. Such as?
Have access to the information.
Have access to the information in the array, sure, yeah. Can you think of a use case where you would loop through an array?
Yeah, like a student, like a college,
Okay, what about it?
how many students are in class, or like
Okay,
whole university.
so to loop through the array of students enrolled in the university, that's true, yeah. Can we think of an example that we probably use every single day? We as consumers use every day? What was that? I think you said it.
You log in.
When you log in. What's happening when you log into an app? You're typing something in, and then it's taking what you typed in and looping through an array and say, can I match what the user typed in with anything contained in this array? Is this a registered user? If it matches, then great, we found you. Let's see if your password matches. If it doesn't match at all, it's going to say, please sign up.
So that's all JavaScript.
That's an if else,
You log in.
right?
JavaScript. No, that's a for loop with an if statement. For loop with an if statement. Okay?
Servers they must have like a shit ton of like people where they can just go through and pretty much find you, you know. I guess
Yeah.
I don't know how that's gonna go.
Yeah, there's lots of lists out there. There's no use in hiding our information anymore.
How do you know it's your name though?
What do you mean? Okay, I get it. That's a good question. Well, that brings us to the next question. Why might we loop through an array of objects? Because the example that I just gave is where you have a text box and you type in your name and it loops through an array of people, right? All these douchebaggy usernames. It loops through an array of people. Well, if I type in EvanW89 and hit log in, it'll loop through the array, it will find a match with this one here, and say, okay, that's a user, we'll let them proceed. But Odie's question is, how do they know that it's your username? What do you usually also enter in addition to a username?
Password.
Yes. A username and a password. And the way to check both of those at the same time is, rather than an array of strings, you have an array of objects. One after the other, objects with a name property and a pass property. And now it's not going to check if the username equals this item in the array. It's going to check if the username equals the name property of this item in the array. And if so, then it's going to check, does the password equal the pass property of that same object in the array? And that object may have other properties too. Maybe it has a full name, maybe it has an email, maybe it has geolocation. What's that?
Thumbprint.
You could have thumbprint nowadays, phone number, anything. Okay.
It's gonna all come back to like true and false.
Everything comes back to true and false. But this is the kind of logic that you're going to be executing this week in your Zodiac app. It's going to be oodles of
So,
fun.
like my question was exactly like, okay, how do you input, like let's say you log into, like signing up for a site.
Yeah.
So people have to log in, right? So how that link to the JavaScript?
The JavaScript is what performs the function of
Because we
actually
don't-
checking.
When we sign in, we sign in on the website, right? Or like sign up for the website.
Yeah,
We don't write on the JavaScript.
that's right. But when JavaScript is capable of pulling information and text and data from your HTML site.
So the HTML is connected to JavaScript.
You type something in HTML, your JavaScript can access it. Do you remember the videos where you had an input field and you had a button with an on-click attribute?
Yep.
You type something in here, you click the button, and it runs a function which does what?
Displays back with the. Well, you display back in basic, of course.
It displays back what you wrote. So let's say this thing has an ID of input, and we stored input in this user input variable. Document dot get element by ID. Almost did it there. Input. Then what do we console log in this function in order to get something to show up in our console?
Put
User input is going to be what? What is that going to return to us?
object.
An object. We don't want to see an object. We want to see this. This string. No?
Or input out there.
How do we get the value which a user has typed in to an input element?
Dot value.
Dot value.
I'm trying to, one of those key videos.
Yeah, one of those key videos. Also going to be very essential for your Zodiac app. So, Odie, this is what happens. You type something in, you click the button, and when you click the button, a function runs which accesses what you just typed in. And you can do anything with this. You can just console log it, or you can store it somewhere. You can put it in a database. You can do any number of things with that information using JavaScript.
Same way with like the prom site, right? When you enter
Yeah.
the name.
Yeah, exactly like the prompts. All right, almost to the break. Number 17. What properties can we use to access or assign what text is contained in a text element from JavaScript?
Well, what would you say?
Dot notation.
Dot value is partially true. That is specific for input elements, text areas, any kind of elements that you can interact with as a user. But let's say, let me create an H1 in my HTML. Okay, I made an H1, and now I'm going to create a variable which selects that H1 test that variable. Okay, how can I access, what properties can I use to access or change the text contained in this text element? Yes, inner text is one. What else is there?
Text node.
No. Text content. Text content is another, does the exact same thing. Just one more. No? Close.
Right.
Nope.
Text H1 or line dash H1.
Mm-mm. It's inner HTML. Which, how's inner HTML different from inner text?
Because it's just selecting, well, selecting the entire element, so.
Let me put it this way. My h1 dot inner text equals, let's do span class equals text info hello, close the span, world. Okay, can we understand what I'm doing here? I'm inserting, yeah, I'm using a bootstrap class, but I'm inserting a span element with some text into the content of the inner text property of this
So,
h1 object.
Inner text literally will display everything right there.
Exactly. Inner text will do that. On the other hand, inner HTML will correctly read this as HTML markup. Does that make sense?
Why
Okay.
didn't you use right there?
I mean, you could do my h1 dot write, but it's a different.
You couldn't do like a span class.
Would it be document.write? That was still allowed.
Document dot write is what works. Okay, document dot write works, but write is not a universal method that you can use on any element like this. It only works for the document. And what's actually happening here is,
Clears everything out.
yeah, document.write is clearing out everything that I'd added and replacing it all. Okay. All right. Quick little brain teaser here. I'm going to jump into my HTML, and I'm going to find my link tag for my main.css, and I'm going to give this link tag an ID of link. Okay? And now in my CSS, let's just give my body a background color. Yes. Background color of tomato. And now I'm going to create a new file, main2.css. And we're going to have the exact same code, but with a different color. Okay? So far, so good? All right. I'm going to reload my page. My background is tomato. I'm going to run document.getElementById link. There's my link tag. Let's store that in a variable real quick. And let's see what properties we can access. These are all the properties available to my link tag. Now you don't need to get lost in here, because that can easily happen. But look at this. Or, we don't even need all this. We can actually just do css/main.css and so it'll still work. Do you catch what happened though?
Here, hold up this second one. Or your main2.css.
I accessed the href property of the link element and I assigned it a new value of main2.css. Let's go back to main1. Back to main2. So have you ever been on a site or in an application which has like a day and a night theme, or a dark and a light theme, blue and red, different style sheets? You can do this on a click event. You can do this on the click of a button. You can do this when a user hits the bottom of your page. You can do this based on any number of things. You can literally do anything in JavaScript. That's the point. All right, let's go ahead and take a break there. Well, last question, what is wrong with this code?
Hashtag.
Yes. All right, let's take a break. Octothorpe.
What's wrong with the
The hashtag should not be there. The ID is profile. That hashtag is part of a CSS selector.
Unless you specifically gave that ID and hashtag.
Yes, and you shouldn't do that. That's yeah. That's gonna go bad real quick.
I'll go bad with what, with the CSS, right? With your supervisor.
Yeah. You could easily make it work with your CSS, but it's really weird and really bad form.
Alright, well, I'll call for a sticker break.
It's like giving your divs a class of div. Very weird.